everyone knows that the New York tech ecosystem is just a behemoth. For now, we're still in this like golden era of tech in New York where people are choosing to be here, and that's awesome.
We are here with Julie Samuels, who is founder and CEO of TechNYC. Thank you so much for joining us today here in our studio. Yeah, you work with all of the tech companies, you know everyone. You kind of have your hand in everything. The last time I think I saw you, you were like with the mayor and all the top VCs. What is your take on how you've seen tech evolve since you've taken the helm there?
So when we started TechNYC in 2016, tech was growing. Tech felt very optimistic, but it still was not that big. It was still early. And when we started the organization, again, 2016, we were still talking about which city, which region of the US would be number 2 behind the Valley, which sounds crazy now. Everyone knows that the New York tech ecosystem is just a behemoth in and of itself, that it is huge and vibrant, and obviously it is not the same as what's happening in the Valley, but I think it's much healthier and much more dynamic than what's happening in the Valley. I do. I think it's so much more integrated into other industries.
Yeah.
That I think, long term, it is so much better for the city of New York. You'll have, things are cyclical. You'll have some industries who are really on the rise, and maybe tech's having a rough year, but then the next year it flips, and it's just the ties that bind it to New York City, the ties that bind tech companies and startups to New York City, the ties amongst other industries really feel to me, again, much healthier than what you see in other places where things are much more insular.
Well, it's much healthier probably for the economy because you have a lot of variety. But then you think about, too, the way that you can integrate and apply things, right? Because you're not just in this little bubble where you're only learning about AI and talking with other people in AI. You're thinking about, and I think that's reflected in a lot of the companies in New York, is like, there's tech companies in design and this and all these different industries.
This is literally the story of tech in New York. I mean, you just nailed it. I don't even need to be here. You are doing my job for me. But seriously, that is it. Because it is hard and complicated and interesting to build new technologies. And that can really arguably happen anywhere when they're nascent. But figuring out how to apply them, figuring out who's going to buy them, who's going to use them, how they're going to use them, that is actually much harder in the end. And that all happens here in New York. In fact, just this week, the University of Maryland, I believe, came out with some new numbers where they showed all of the openai jobs ranked by city in the country. And New York was first. We have the most openai jobs right now. And my sense of that is because
available AI jobs.
Available, right. Job postings, jobs to be filled. And my sense of that is because it's not just a bunch of tech startups hiring those roles. It's financial firms, it's quant firms. I mean, we have AI capacity at all different kinds of tech-enabled companies all over the 5 boroughs.
Interesting. That's actually a very surprising statistic. So you talk about creating this ecosystem. I mean, that doesn't happen overnight, obviously, and it isn't just about getting people who want to be engineers to the city. It's about getting the capital, all of those things. What was that process like for you?
So listen, a lot of this is going to happen. I would like to take credit for it, but a lot of this is going to happen on its own. There's so much about New York that is just prime for people to build and grow businesses here. And that means startups that are founded here. There are over 25,000 tech-enabled startups currently in New York. Wow. But that also means companies who expand here. So, OpenAI just took 2 floors in the Puck building downtown. So we also see this really interesting dynamic of successful tech companies immediately expanding here and growing really big presences here once they see some commercial success somewhere else. So those kinds of factors all really help.
They want to have a footprint in New York. Okay.
And we've seen this. This has been going on since the early 2010s, even the early 2000s, when Google was opening its office here. This is a trend that speaks to New York's core strengths, I would say.
Okay.
But more broadly, there's another really interesting trend, and it's fun to talk about. Or it's interesting to talk about right now. We're 5 years. This week as we tape this, it's like 5-year anniversary of the beginning of
the lockdowns.
The lockdowns. But one of the things that happened as the lockdowns started opening up is that we really saw a market correction. A lot of people who worked in tech used to go to the Valley because inertia brought them there. If you work in tech, someone says to you at some point, why aren't you doing this in the Valley? That stronghold really broke during COVID. For a number of reasons that we could talk about, some of them just cultural with regard to San Francisco, a million different reasons. But what we saw is that so a lot of people in tech moved around after that. They moved.
And Miami,
Austin,
exactly. There are a lot of
movement across the country. But what we've seen, what the numbers are very clear about, is that New York saw more net new tech employees moving here. So we gained. I'm sure some people left. I know a small handful. They're crazy, but they're did.
Very vocal.
Very vocal. But we saw way more people move here because they wanted to be here. And that's been really impressive. And so the numbers are very clear that that's the case. I think it's something like 1 in 7 tech employees who moved in the early 2020s moved here. But we also anecdotally know that a lot of those people who moved here were actually quite senior in their companies. Senior people move, so teams start to follow. So this is all just like a really great trend for New York. And it's because people want to live here. And I'm going to say one more thing about this.
I love all of this.
Great. This is one of the things I love the most about tech in New York, actually. There's a lot of things I love about tech in New York. It's literally my job, but I also believe this stuff. And this dynamic is my favorite. So because if you've been working in tech, like I said, someone at some point has said to you, why don't you live in the Valley? Mm-hmm. That means that pretty much everyone who works in tech in New York has a reason to be in New York. And that reason oftentimes has nothing to do with tech. Maybe they love the theater. Maybe their family is here. Maybe they've just always wanted to live in New York City. Fill in the blank. There's a million different reasons people might want to be here. And in many instances, people in tech choose to be here for one of those many reasons, which means you uniquely have an industry of people who love New York. That's kind of an amazing dynamic. Over time, we'll probably lose some of that as tech gets bigger and bigger. You'll have more people coming here for jobs because they'll have no choice but to come here. But for now, we're still in this like golden era of tech in New York where people are choosing to be here, and that's awesome.
Interesting. Do you think that some of these hubs that we've seen, like the Navyyard, how important is that? I mean, those companies seem pretty small at this point. Is that something that hopefully it's going to pay off more in the long term, or how successful do you think those sort of build-outs have been?
I think that what we see at the Navyyard is really important. Some of the companies are early stage, some of them are small, but it's really important to have a multifaceted tech ecosystem. It's crucial that we have a sector that has all different kinds of companies where there's two things in particular related to this. Number one, something we don't talk about enough is how we have so much great tech education here, particularly post-secondary. The universities do a really good job, and over the past decade have done an exceedingly good job at building out their tech education. And so that really helps attract people to come here, to stay here, to build different types of companies.
Come for the education, stay for the jobs.
And then you make friends, and then you stay, and that really matters for a lot of more kind of manufacturing tech jobs you see in the Navyyard, for instance. It's really important that you have that kind of dynamism happening.
Perfect.
The second point is that, and this is another trend that has happened since we launched TechNYC in 2016 and a little bit before. One of the challenges tech had in the early 2010s and the early 2000s was there was this feeling that you could come here for there were great tech jobs here, and you could come here for a tech job, but a lot of people weren't sure that there was a second job or a third job. So that they ended up just going to the Valley because they knew they could build a long-term career. That shifted. I'd say 2015, 2017, 2018, I don't know. Sometime around then, that just flipped on its head.
What do you think are like the most important things that you've done as an organization to help facilitate bringing people here?
So I think it was really important when we launched TechNYC that we helped kind of organize the industry to think about how it's plugging in with the city. So we do a lot of work in politics, we do a lot of work with policymakers and other civic stakeholders, and it's incredibly important for an industry as it becomes bigger to plug in with the infrastructure that makes New York City, New York City. Yep. So we've done, I think, a big pillar of our work, something I think we've done a pretty good job at, is plugging not just the companies, but actually the people who work at the companies into New York City. There's a lot more work to do there, but it's crucial work and it's important work. We've also worked on some really interesting specific projects. Some have been more successful than others. One I'm really proud of is helping, especially on the political side, we helped push Empire AI through the state budget process last year. Empire AI is currently underway now. It is a consortium of New York State universities, Columbia, Cornell, NYU, SUNY, CUNY, RPI. We got a bunch of funding. They got a bunch of funding from the state and from the private sector, and they all put in their own money, and they are building a great big high-powered computer up in Buffalo, at the University of Buffalo, and all of those schools will have access to use the compute, the high-powered compute on that computer, which is amazing.
I don't even know what that is.
No other state has this. Basically,
what
the premise
is a high-powered compute?
Okay, so right now, the way the market is, particularly if you're using AI, if you're building or using AI tools to do research, you need a ton of GPUs, CPUs.
Yeah,
this is why NVIDIA is so big, and right now, only the biggest companies can even afford that. Can even begin to afford that. The universities can't, Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, like they don't have these kind of computers. And so what we did is we worked with the state, we worked with Governor Hochul, we worked with all these schools, and they pooled the resources to build it for themselves. They're in the process now. They have to build a whole new building, but they have an early version that's about a tenth the size, and there's hundreds of projects have already started on this machine in Buffalo. And these researchers are working on like really interesting hard problems, things, thinking about climate and changing weather patterns, thinking about cancer, all kinds of things that they really would have taken months and months before, now they can do in a few days or a week. And so that's the kind of thing which is we're really proud of. It's a huge thing, but it feels like a small piece of what we do at TechNYC. But what it does is it helps attract people to New York.
Yeah.
And they start doing the research in New York, and this is still new, but it's a good example of how over time, hopefully they start building companies in New York, or maybe finding a startup to work with and license some technology. Like this is how we build the future of technology here.
Yeah, interesting. I know this was a few years ago now, but it became a big topic of discussion when Amazon announced they were going to move. I think it was going to create 100,000 jobs.
Yeah.
I'm getting some of the details wrong, but it was a big deal because Amazon was going to come here, and then there was tremendous backlash politically.
Yes.
That obviously, that kind of dynamic makes it difficult for tech companies to come here. Is that still politically the reality that you think we're dealing with? Is there still a lot of backlash against big tech companies and against the way that can change and impact, a community?
So I think Amazon HQ2 not being in Queens right now, where it was supposed to be, is terrible for New York. That is, earlier you asked me about things I was really proud of. That is one thing that we worked on that I'm not proud of. So the short answer is yes and no. I think there's more we can do to attract companies, but not for nothing. I mean, Amazon did not build a headquarters in Queens, but has since built enormous offices all over the city, warehouses all over the city and state. Since that happened, Amazon bought the old Lord & Taylor building on Fifth Avenue, which, as I understand now, is completely full. People are working there every day, and it's beautiful, and it's really interesting and amazing how they built and revived such an iconic New York building. We see other tech companies doing that too, by the way. It really speaks to how New York evolves as a city, that new industries come in to these older spaces. Google just redid St. John's Terminal on the west side. Also, it's beautiful and amazing. So this is a lot about New York's future. But to answer your question more specifically,
that is cool to see them investing in
it's important.
Maintaining the infrastructure.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of people pine for a time that looked different, but that is not the time we live in.
Right.
So we have to figure out how to revive our infrastructure, how to revive our buildings, and tech is driving that. It's really, really important for the future of the city. And I guess to answer your question, more and more people, there's still a lot of political tension around large tech companies. I can't pretend but that's an international trend. That is not a New York specific trend, of course. But I'm gratified that so many local politicians, even when they maybe disagree or have some concerns with some of the technologies, so many of them do understand why we have to care about economic growth as a city, why we have to care about jobs, the future of jobs in New York. And you don't need to be a data scientist. You don't need to run TechNYC. You don't have to be an economics professor to understand what is so obvious, and that is that the future of jobs in New York is dependent upon tech jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your take as well on crypto? That's a big industry, and there's a lot of crypto, sort of Bitcoin related companies here, but it seems like the regulation is a lot tougher here than it is in other states.
We have something called the BIT license that is now well over a decade old, and that is tough to deal with, but a lot of companies do. Clearly, there are a ton of companies here in New York building crypto, building blockchain, building Web3. You see that in the financial institutions, but you also see just really interesting companies like Uniswap is one that we do a lot of work with. Solana just opened new space here a year or two ago. There's a lot of really interesting dynamic companies here in that space. Also, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in the art space. That's cool that's happening here. We're in a really interesting time nationally, obviously, around crypto and regulation, lack thereof. So I think in this particular moment, we're kind of watching to see what DC does there.
Okay.
Or doesn't do, I don't know.
Yeah. No, because it is, obviously, there's things that you can do as a state, but it's much more of a sort of federal issue. What's your take on work from home versus going back to the office? Because a lot of people in tech are remote. How does that shape the city? You know, it sounds like these companies are still investing in offices, still building those out. But I know, at least, at Google, a lot of times people aren't always in the office, even though they're so beautiful. Do you think that's something that you would like to see tech companies push? Or is that just a societal change? Like, you kind of can't stem the tide because people are going to be able to work remotely?
Well, I think we actually in New York see more people in the office than other cities, specifically tech companies. More people are coming back to work. Offices feel full to me they at least feel full on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I can't necessarily say the same about Monday and Friday, but people are coming back. I think there's a few reasons why New York is different than other cities with regard to that. I mean, one is just that a lot of people live in small apartments here.
Yeah.
And they don't have home offices, so they go to work.
Right.
I mean, I just think that is more of the New York culture. I think that we have public transit that functions, which other cities that have large tech industries don't have. So, it's not like people need to drive in and find parking. They jump on the subway. There still are people working from home, but it is that dynamic is much smaller here than in other cities with a lot of tech companies. You just notice it even when I'm doing Zooms. No one's working at home anymore. And the people who are working from home, they all have their black backgrounds blurred. It's like it's no longer
socially acceptable.
Yeah, I think that is really starting to open up more and more.
That's interesting. That's a very interesting trend.
Yeah, I think those days. I mean, also, it was easy enough to go home for tech companies in 2020, 2021, because the technical infrastructure was there. People were very comfortable, getting on Zoom or whatever. People in tech, it was a pretty comfortable transition from a tech perspective.
Yes.
It was also pretty comfortable from a team perspective because people had built relationships within their teams. But now, in the past, I'd say 2 years or so, the market really started opening up again. People were switching jobs more. They were just changing companies they worked for. And that's when it requires, whether you're at a tech company or probably, I would think, any kind of company, to build new bonds, to build new team working relationships. And that is really hard to do over video.
Yeah, certainly. What are you hearing from tech CEOs in particular that their biggest issues are with New York right now, or the biggest challenges that they're facing here?
That's a really good question. And one of the really interesting things that's kind of happened over the years that TechNYC has existed is that in the early days, if you had asked me that, most of my answers were very tech specific. Something about tech policy, something about a state law, perhaps. But now, increasingly, when I talk to tech CEOs, their biggest concerns are the same concerns as any New Yorkers as any CEO. You know, they want to talk about public safety. They want to talk about safety on the subways. They want to talk about good schools, affordability. Because what we have seen, you know, in tech in particular, is that the tech companies will go where the people they want to hire are. And in tech, it continues to be a fight for talent, a fight for hiring the best employees. So if young, they don't need to be young, but if smart, interesting, dynamic people want to live here, then the companies will stay here. And that is increasingly, so it's kind of shifted. You know, the top concerns have shifted from very tech specific to just very people specific, I guess. And that's a really interesting dynamic that shows that tech is becoming better integrated into the city.
That's a wrap on today's episode of New York Next. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can also catch us on the New York Post YouTube channel, and of course, be sure to follow us on social media for the latest updates and behind-the-scene content. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. Join the conversation and let us know what you think.